And Martin, I know you have a personal story to share. Why don't you tell us what that is?
Yeah, Jennifer, sorry. I am myself a survivor of sexual abuse. It happened from a very young age. I was about 5 or so. I started drinking quite heavily when I was 13 years old, and eventually at about the age of 42, I sort of hit my rock bottom where I decided that I needed to stop drinking. Biggest problem was I stopped drinking and my life didn't change. I thought it would be easy if I gave up drinking, gave up the booze, everything would improve, but it didn't. It stayed the same. So I was just a sober idiot, you know. I wasn't a drunk idiot now. But eventually, it was about 3-4 years later when I realized that the sexual abuse in my childhood had a huge role to play in my drinking and my attitude towards life and all the things that I did. So I was a very broken individual, and I was about 45 when I started dealing with all of the fallout, as I call it, of my sexual abuse. At that time, I was really desperate for help, and I sort of phoned around to all the psychologists and all the organizations that I could find, and there was absolutely no help available specifically for men. You know, there was counseling available for girls, and everybody would say to me, well, you know, it's the same for girls as it is for boys, and, you know, so we just use the same theories. But it wasn't. You know, I needed a very personal approach to my healing to be able to deal with this sort of thing. And I tried and I searched and I searched and I couldn't find anything until eventually I went online and I started finding resources overseas, authors overseas, and it was those authors and people overseas that helped me to deal with it. And you know, in terms of recovery, I mean, I really approached it head on, and it took me 3 years from then to now. So and I've really hit it quite hard. And I remember about 6 months into my recovery when I was on the verge of committing suicide, where I thought, Lord, if I make it through this, I don't want any other man to have to suffer and go through this sort of thing. I want them to know that there's help available for this thing, you know, because men that have been sexually abused, just nobody talks about it. It doesn't happen. A lot of people say, oh, I didn't know that happens. It does. It happens a lot. We find incidents of boys being sexually abused almost as high as girls in certain areas of the country. So it's not a case. We can't hide our heads in the sand anymore and expect this thing to go away. It's getting worse.
And I just want to clarify, you are recovered from an alcohol addiction.
Alcohol, porn, sex, you name it, I had them. If it was addictive, I took it. I used it, yeah. These are all things that I used to try and deal with. You know, I don't like calling them addictions anymore. These are what I call coping measures. These are things that I used to keep me alive, you know. I mean, my life was tragic. I didn't want to live. I tried to kill myself when I was 16, when I was 23, 24, and again when I was about 45. So, you know, suicide is a huge thing in our lives. And porn and alcohol and drugs and sex and all that sort of just helps us to cope, to deal with, you know, to make us feel a little bit more normal, but it actually has the opposite effect on our lives. It just helps us not feel. That's all it does.
Martin, can you talk me through some of the feelings and things that are going through your heads that would lead to 3 or 4 suicide attempts like you just mentioned?
I just felt my life was worthless, you know. When I was 16 and I was looking for help and I couldn't really find help, I just felt that if this is what life is about, being sexually abused and going through all these sort of things, drinking heavily, I mean, what's the point? You know, what's the point of living? And you look at all these other chaps that are so-called happy and having a great time and that sort of thing, and it's very difficult. So you kind of see yourself as not worthwhile. You kind of see yourself as more inferior to anybody else, and you just wonder what it's all about, you know, and you try and end it, you know. And that was the same when I was 23. I was all alone. I couldn't relate to women. In those days, we didn't have as easy an access to the internet as we do now. So going on the internet and having relationships and surfing porn and all that sort of stuff wasn't as easy back then. So suicide looked like a good option, you know. So yeah, I couldn't get into I couldn't relate to people. I couldn't have relationships. It was very difficult to me.
Cheryl, Martin mentioned that along with the porn addiction, he had an alcohol addiction. Basically, anything that was addictive, he had it. Is this common with people with addictions?
Tragically, yes, it is. You know, I think again, I don't like to say which one started first, but Martin made a very, very accurate, appropriate point in saying it's just about numbing the feelings. And whatever works quickly and numbs them the most is the medium they'll use. So maybe they'll start Friday night, they'll hang out with friends and get really intoxicated. Get home, hate themselves, guilt and shame, use porn, take sleeping tablets and go to bed. So it becomes a vicious cycle of trying to cope, self-distracting, but like wanting the silence that has evaded them probably since the age of 5, or whenever the trauma started happening to them. But we very seldom see somebody with just one addiction. We find polyaddictions from drugs, alcohol, porn and gambling, sex and work. It's whatever it's going to take to help me not think or feel quickly and effectively.